Welcome to Overtones, a show that explores the charming interactions between musical cultures. I'm Saili Oak, a Hindustani singer from India living in the US.
And I'm Reena Esmail, a composer from the US living in Los Angeles. And we're the co directors of Shastra, an organization that connects the classical music traditions of India and the West. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Overtones. This is episode 3, and we're going to start talking about rehearsal technique. We're going to take a deep dive into how rehearsal technique differs between different cultures and the interesting things that can come up there. A couple weeks ago, we were recording this piece for New West Symphony for a string quartet and Indian classical singer. And, because things have to be recorded so quickly because there's so little time now for musicians. I mean, Saili, you basically just jumped in and did a few really perfect takes of this piece for string quartet and Indian singer, but that's a really rare thing to be able to do, right?
Yeah, I was a little nervous going into it because I didn't know the quartet. I had never met the musicians before this, and we had barely any rehearsal time before the recording.
I mean, and that's something that, when you say, for example, you were to hire a violinist or a cellist or something in Western classical music, you would just give them the music and they would show up at the rehearsal and they would probably play it from start to finish the first time, maybe never having heard the piece before. But obviously, it's a really different situation in Indian classical music, right?
If it was an Indian music concert, a Hindustani concert, I would have probably showed up an hour before and just spent a few minutes with my tabla player, harmonium player, and we would have probably just gone over the repertoire. And some of it may even be decided on the stage then and there, and it's just so improvised that we don't really have to worry about the rehearsal process in itself.
Exactly. And so, I mean, I would love for you to reflect back on the first time that you ever really worked with Western musicians and how different that was than, what happened on the stage a couple weeks ago.
It was a few years ago in Albany Symphony. The first time we recorded your piece Aria with them, and I remember having showed up to the rehearsal without a score. It's generally very frowned upon in Indian music culture to be referring to a notebook or a page when you're performing live. So I didn't show up with the score because I had memorized the whole thing, and I knew my exact entrances and exits uh, in my piece. But I didn't realize the rehearsal process didn't just start and finish with the entire piece, but it could just be a few measures into it, and then everyone just comes in at letter M, and I didn't know what letter M was. And you were my savior back then because it was your iPad that I referred it from. But that was a nightmare of an experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so different because when you have music where you have to have 80, 100 people aligning at the same time, everyone has to pretty much do the same thing. Otherwise, it's very hard, when not one person has the lead, but you trade off who has the lead. Even though there's a conductor there, different instruments have solos, stuff like that. And I remember that, and I remember walking to the first rehearsal with you and realizing you didn't have a score. And I mean, to me, that was like, oh my gosh, what is she gonna do? And you were like, oh, it's fine, I have it memorized. And I was like, oh, no, 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 that's not how it works in Western classical
and
music.
and now I
Um,
know I've learned my lesson, because though my part, most of it was improvised. I did do an alap of Yaman for 4 hour turns from this measure onwards. Though it was improvised, I had to know the exact place of alignment where I had to come in and where it went out and where everything else was. So it just helps in a Western setting to have that music sheet right in front of you. It's very comforting now.
Right, it's just such a different modality. And I mean, it's interesting because now I watch you in rehearsal and you know how to actually conduct the players in the right pattern. If you feel like things are getting off, you know how to give cues, you know what information you need to be able to come in. And I think as Western musicians, we take those things for granted because we just don't realize that in other cultures that's not the way that music happens. And I think that's what's so interesting is by seeing the things that you didn't know about the rehearsal process, it actually made me just get a little bit closer to the reality that Hindustani musicians see. I had this experience then after having worked with Saili for many years. I had an experience of working with Hindustani musicians who had never engaged with Western classical music before in my oratorio, This Love Between Us. So this was a sitar player and a tabla player from India. And again, these are consummate, amazing musicians, but just people who hadn't really worked with an orchestra before. And that's a really different skill set. But because of what I knew from Saili and because of all that work that I had done with her over the years, I was able to really figure out how to relate to them. And so what was really interesting, and Saili, I know you have heard this story many times, I realized that there was going to be very little meeting before the first full group rehearsal. And so, I went to the commissioner of the piece and I said, hey, can we get some more time with me and the sitar and tabla player just so I can help them acclimate and go through a kind of process? And they were like, oh, no, we're not worried. They're professionals. They have the parts. They should be fine. And again, in my mind, I'm remembering our Albany Symphony experience and thinking, oh, okay, this might be a little scary. They might not realize. And then went to the Indian players and said, hey, Skype with them in India. Can I go over stuff with you? Can I help you? And they were like, oh no, we've got it. It's fine. We know our parts. We've listened to it a few times. We're all set. And they're set for an Indian rehearsal. They're not set for a Western rehearsal. So I thought, oh gosh, this is going to be rough. This is going to be rough. And
Exactly. I
so
mean,
the
that's the
first
first time.
rehearsal.
So that's the first rehearsal was when I felt like, is music really a universal language? Because I believe I'm speaking proficient Hindi and I can understand a little bit of English, but I don't know if we are communicating really.
Right. And then it's like me and they're watching the two people speak languages and kind of passing each other and thinking, oh, you're both saying really great things, but you're just not kind of communicating with each other. And I mean, of course, that's what happened at the first rehearsal. But because I had had this experience of working with you, I knew what people needed to do. So essentially, I was there as this intermediary, and I was kind of translating in real time between the sitar and tabla player and then the conductor of the orchestra. And actually, we should show that picture.
Yes, let me pull it up.
Yeah, so this is a picture of me at one of the premiere performances at NCPA in Mumbai, where you can see I'm sitting between the sitar and tabla player. And what is amazing is that they're both looking at me because we went through this whole period because again, a sitar player is usually a leader. They're the person who's leading, so they're not used to having to follow anyone else as they're playing. So the sitar player, who was so wonderful, he would just kind of get into this world and he'd be looking out into the audience, and I would be trying to get his attention, and so I would have my hand out just right at his eye level to be able to say, okay, now come in, now move now. And it's funny because it's just a thing that because I knew the piece, I was able to do that. But then what was so amazing is, this was one of the first performances, but then just a little over a year later, you did the exact same thing. I love this picture because it's just a year and a half later. You're just in that exact same role. And I love how just confident and in control you seem, where I remember, you being on the stage of Albany and just thinking, oh my gosh, I just hope I get to the end of this piece. And now it's like, you're the person who's just in there.
Right, for the sitar and the tabla player, like in your instance, who have not grown up to be reading scores, can just focus on their music if somebody is just cueing them in and out.
Exactly. And each artist is able to express what they express best, with also without having to be worried about, oh, am I doing this at the exact right time? Usually just having that intermediary in there helps everyone, even the conductor on the stage, feel comfortable that his little gesture, which might be that, is communicating what it needs to communicate to players who aren't used to interpreting those gestures. Well, we'll leave you guys with a tiny little excerpt of the one of the first performances of This Love Between Us. This one was a different one, not the one in Mumbai, but the one in New Haven.